Hi, welcome to the Matriculate Summer Curriculum Training Module. My name is Jill and I'm the campus lead for Princeton.
Hi, my name is Marab and I'm the campus lead for Emory, Notre Dame, and Columbia.
In today's session, we're going to review a number of the curriculum units that weren't covered in person so that you're prepared as you work with your high school fellows on them. We realize that all of you are at different places with your students. Some of you have been working together for months, some of you were recently assigned. So we intend for this training module to be a reference for you to use, either to look forward as to what to do with your students, or to review what you've already done and see if there are any opportunities to give them new information and make sure that they're really prepared. In today's module, we'll review a number of summer content units more in depth, including which application your student should consider applying with, how to develop a strong letter of recommendation and resume, and how to make sure that their testing plan is thorough and well thought out. We'll also be reviewing some new data from the class of 2019 and their enrollment results. These results will help you know how to approach some of the major moments and challenges you might encounter this fall.
And to talk about some of the reflections of high school students that we've gotten so far, just to kind of give you guys a better picture of really the work that you're doing and how impactful you already have been a few months in. And just to read off a few of them, the first we have, like, my advisor is really willing to help me find resources. For example, when I was interested in a program at a college, she researched the program and sent me information on similar programs at other colleges as well. Folks kind of really saying that I'm happy so far. It's really helping me to plan out my college. I feel like I focus too much on one thing, so I don't take time to think about other options. Matriculate is helping me make sure my dream college is really the best college for me. Just to kind of let you guys know that as we are pulling through high school fellows and seeing their interactions and their experiences with the program, know that so many of you are already making an impact, in the first couple of months, and we're just so stoked to see that. So as we kind of get onto the content and as you look back with everything that you've done so far, know that the work you're doing is making a huge impact.
So one note before we dive into the content, a number of you have asked questions about session summaries. How long do they need to be? How detailed? So we wanted to provide a quick overview of what makes a great session summary. A great session summary is really specific about your individual student. So for example, a lot of session summaries that we read, and we do read all of them, talk about what you talked about. I talked about financial aid with my student. I introduced my student to some scholarships. That's helpful, but is also already covered by the question that asks what topics you covered. The information we're really looking for is the specific details about where your student's at in this process and what they're thinking about college. Think of it as building a sort of permanent Matriculate record for your student. If you tell us the details about what your student's looking for, it'll make our interventions later in this process much more effective. Moments where we may intervene in your relationships include if your student needs to be reassigned for some reason, if they haven't completed one of the milestones that indicates they're on track. Having details about your student's progress so far will help us figure out why they might be off track and how we can support them. And finally, at the end of the year, if we need to intervene in their enrollment, say advocating for them to be admitted off the wait list or helping them appeal financial aid, the more details we have about your student's progress, the better we'll be positioned to do that. So as you can see in the improved example, it briefly touches upon what the advisor covered with the student, but then goes into what they learned from the student in response to the topic that they were covering. Session summaries don't need to be long. They don't need to be exhaustive essays. 3 to 5 sentences at most can convey what you talked about accurately, but including those details about your student is of the utmost importance. So let's cover what we're going to cover today. In today's session, the summer 2019 program term content includes the personal statement, the college list, and full tuition scholarships. These are the things we think you'll be spending the most time on this summer. And good news, you've already reviewed them together as a fellowship in your in-person meetings and your webinars to date. Looking ahead, we know that your students are going to be working on their resumes, on securing those letters of recommendation if they haven't already, and in figuring out what application is best for them and how to apply to college. So today's information is really looking forward towards the fall and helping you prepare for those key questions. In addition, we're going to go back and revisit the testing plan. While you didn't discuss this explicitly at your fellowship meetings, we know a lot of your students will be grappling with what tests to take and whether or not to retake over the summer, and we want you to be prepared in those conversations. Just a reminder that in the curriculum base, at the top of the curriculum index tab, you can find the roadmap for the summer. In terms of timing, the expectation is that you will have completed the junior year spring curriculum by the end of the summer. So regardless of when you received your students, we know that these months are enough time to complete those items and set your student up well to apply this fall. The summer checklist items that we're highlighting on this slide are sort of the culminating items that after you've done all the intermediate steps, by the end of the summer, your student should have a balanced college list, have decided how they're going to apply, have put together many of the key elements of that application, including their resume and essay drafts, and have considered full tuition scholarship applications and made good progress on them, since those deadlines come up quickly once the summer is over. So we highly encourage you to use the summer checklist, use the roadmap resource, and have that guide your progress. That'll help answer the question that's always top of advising fellows' minds: what should I be working on right now, and am I on track with my student?
Great. And for today, we're going to go ahead and talk about really what goes into the college application, as all of you should have done to get to the point that you are now, is you do have to literally apply to college. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about two of the national ones that face together. And so today we'll dive into the common application. This is actually the most common application you'll see. And so it is a tree-like application platform that many colleges and universities use as their main platform. And so when we say a tree application, that really means you're filling out your basic information one time. And so like your profile, your address, the schools that you attend to, your transcripts, it's really just inputting that into one base. And so what the Common App does is it takes that main piece of information and then sends it across to every single school that you apply to. So you don't have to fill out that information over and over. This year, our application opens on August 1st. And to talk a little bit about fee waivers as well. Counselors have options on being able to grant you a fee waiver, but within the common application, students will address if they qualify or not, and that could be done through multiple ways. And whether a student qualifies for an SAT or ACT fee waiver, or whether they qualify for a free or reduced lunch, being able to indicate that in the common application under their profile section makes them eligible for a fee waiver, and then counselors verify this information. As you're working through the Common App with your students, they'll also have access to a mobile app. This application kind of gives them a good way to just keep track of all the sections that they filled out in having it under a nice, easy way to go from there. But in reality, what the Common App does is that, and what most schools will ask for, are three basic components. And so for that, your students will be submitting their high school transcript, detailing a list of their extracurricular activities, and then also listing out their test scores and test dates. And for those of you who haven't filled out the Common App or applied through a UC application or through another state-centric application, know that the Common App can look different from what you normally applied through, but in reality, what most colleges are asking are the same levels of information. And so when you're thinking about what goes into the college application, being able to answer these three questions of transcript, extracurriculars, and test scores is kind of your trinity of like how to guide yourself through the application. And for the next piece, we'll talk a little bit about the coalition application. Some of you may have experience in this as well. And the coalition application is still fairly recently new. It was released in 2016, and it's an application platform that's used by less colleges than the Common App, but there's over 140 colleges. What makes the Common Application unique is that it's focused on schools that who have kind of embraced this mission of college access and affordability. So every single school on the coalition application will either meet a student's full demonstrated need or offer low-cost in-state tuition. And you can see that pattern come through in public schools versus the private schools. How really is the Coalition app different? And these are a couple of things that they do. One thing that they offer is the locker. And the locker is a private digital space in which students can organize materials such as their documents and videos and photos, or really any additional record of what they've done in high school. And it kind of becomes a space like where students can just take pride in any of the work that they've done and feel like this is something that I want a college to know about me. And it isn't really into this specific platform, and really kind of a way for students to express themselves and what they think they've accomplished throughout high school. In addition, the Coalition also offers a collaboration space, and that it's a virtual area where you can connect with your counselors or teachers or other educators and ask for their input on preparations for the applications. And so this offers a space where those folks can then actually log onto the application and collaborate on things like college list or essays or application. In addition, there's a My Coalition Counselor, which is really another great resource for students in that there's a directory of articles and other resources for college preparation. And that's where students can learn more about financial aid or standardized tests or college essays. And so again, really, even though these are two applications and you can think that they're two different spaces and two different things to fill out, in reality, the Coalition app is also asking the basic set of questions as well. So whether that's the high school transcript, their list of extracurriculars, and test scores and test dates. And so understanding that these are two different applications, but asking for two basic, fundamental things, that's really what we're trying to dig through today. So let's look at some key differences. First off, the number of schools is much more different on the Coalition app versus the Common App, right? The Common App is the most used application in the country, while the Coalition app is still very recently new and has a very specific set of guidelines for what schools can be on that list. So it can be tough to really start advising once you dig into both applications and whether or not you want to stretch yourself thin here. So a question that you definitely want to ask yourself is the locker feature. So the locker feature on the Coalition app is open to students starting in their freshman year. And so if you have a high school fellow who's been actually on the Coalition app and they've been using the locker throughout their high school career, that gives you a big indicator that students are already being very proactive and are using the Coalition app in a way that's intended and can show you like this is something that they should be invested in a way that you can help them stand out. If your student is involved in something that they can't really display on the Common App or they feel that they just might not have the space for it, the locker can be that space. And so this is where it's really key to establish that relationship building that you've all been doing past in the summer, and knowing if your students have these talents or have these qualities that can maybe show up in this part of the application but not in the Common application. And know that if your high school fellow has a college list where one school is on both platforms, know that there isn't a penalty for applying on the Common App versus the Coalition. Schools that receive applications from both sites are supposed to kind of rank those equally, and that there isn't really one better application to fill out. That's really more dependent on what your student is doing and what they're applying for. Next little piece that we want to talk about too is really just kind of how to advise on the application. This is kind of a big project, and so being able to break this section down into manageable pieces is really, really critical here. And creating a plan with your high school fellow is important. So know that that profile information and everything that's fillable, that's something that you can kind of already do on day one when the application opens or even now. And taking that info and just kind of understanding having this all filled out is really that psychological boost and seeing that piece of the application filled out to kind of get started on the rest of the pieces as well. Really on taking your time on extracurricular activities and details, this is a really important section. It's kind of the thing that really makes students stand apart outside of the personal statement. So really understanding that your students are advocating for themselves in this section, understanding what they're involved in, what the program descriptions are, what their commitment to them is. We'll talk more about this in the resume building portion, but know that this is a really important piece to dive into. And it's a section that you want to have your students take their time on to make sure that they have everything they need in this piece so that they can accurately show who they are and talk about the commitment level of what they've been doing within high school. And then the personal statements and the supplements, right? These are probably the biggest projects, and as most of you are aware, it takes time, takes drafts, take multiple revisions. And so understanding that you don't want to just open the Common App and have everything open and then done in one sitting, it's maybe not a most realistic way to do this. And so kind of having regular check-ins to see, like, did they fill out the basic information? Have they started on their supplements? Have they started on their big personal statement? How many activities have they listed, right? And so being able to develop this plan on the Common App or other coalition app is really, really important to establish from the start, and definitely not something that you want to do right away. And next, we'll talk about building our resume and requesting letters of recommendation. I think this is something that a lot of students really struggle with in finding, and kind of like, how do they kind of really talk about themselves, and really how do they really value themselves in the sense of outside of a transcript and outside of a personal statement. And the best way to do this is in establishing a resume. So really kind of breaking down, like, what are your students into? What have they done? What do they want to do? So some things I kind of like want to specifically highlight here is like their interests and passions. Students can really have interests that might not show up in an academic lens, but really show up for them as people, and really what colleges might want to know, and things that could like show them as a three-dimensional student. And so being able to have that conversation and understand like what your students are into, and being able to have them give a detailed description on this is super key and really important. And if it shows in addition, any of their additional activities or organizations or clubs that they're involved in. Leadership positions are really key here. I think being able to talk about what students are involved in the sense of not just all the things that they're involved in. So if they're involved in 10 or 12 or 14 clubs, that's not really what colleges are looking for, but really it's the commitment level of what folks are showing. And so if a student is the president of a club for 4 years and showed dedication and kept running meetings, that's something that is like a long-term impact and a commitment level that really has folks stand out, as opposed to just a student who might have just signed up for the sake of signing up for an activity. And then lastly, I really want to also highlight family responsibilities. I think for students who might not be involved with activities in school or out of school, or maybe breaking that traditional paradigm of being involved in all the extracurriculars, I think it's important to ask questions on what the responsibilities might be like at home, or if they are involved in caretaking for another relative or family member, but really just understanding like what is the student involved with in order to get a full picture, and so that when folks need to advocate for your students, that they can speak to this as well. So the reason we have our students really work on their resumes and have you be a big part of that process is that this is kind of like the main brag sheet or resume that students could then hand out for when they need to ask for a letter of recommendation. And for those of you who have asked for letters of rec or have been really lucky to write one, they're really hard. And especially if you are working with a student that you might not know as well, being able to write that letter of recommendation is a difficult process, and being able to speak to their qualities can be a project. And so when you have as much information as possible, it makes this process a little bit easier. So it's important to really establish with your high school fellows that they have to advocate for themselves in this process, and providing a level of detailed information to set up their recommenders. So whether that's through the things that they're involved with in their families, whether that's things that they're involved with in their job or their clubs, being able to kind of hand this sheet and go like, hey, here are the things that I'm really interested in, that I'm really involved with, can be super key in showing that they need to, that their recommenders can then speak to this. This is especially important if you find that your high school fellow is struggling connecting with core content teachers. We'll talk about who your high school fellows need to ask in the next slide, but they do need to ask, or they do need to get letters of recommendation from 2 content teachers. And so for a lot of students, this could be a hard ask. And so being able to build this and go to an educator and say like, hey, here are the things that I've been involved with, kind of creates a roadmap or a plan. And so that your students can then feel great about who they're asking for the letters of rec, and know that they have set themselves up in the best position as they're relying on someone else to do this really key important piece. And just to clarify for folks, we aren't asking advising fellows to write letters of recommendation. That should be done through teachers and counselors, or anyone of students who've been working with a CBO or in their employment opportunities as well. But we'll talk more about who should be writing a letter of recommendation. And this is who to ask. So kind of as we covered, 2 teachers from core academic areas. And so that's where students can then think about who they want to ask, who have they had like a great relationship with. If they've had a core content teacher that they've had for multiple years, that's a great place to start. Know that their counselor is also required to write a letter of recommendation for them. So here it's important that high school fellows know who their counselor is, and they should be in their office and get to know their counselor so that their counselor can then write a great letter of rec for them. So again, being able to advocate for yourself, to sit in that room and know that folks can write a great letter of rec for them. And then lastly, one optional supplemental reference. So this can be from another teacher. That doesn't have to be from a core content area, a supervisor from their work, or a volunteer or internship, or additionally a CBO counselor. So those are all great places to ask for letters of recommendation. Some folks to avoid and our family members. Know that most programs and colleges won't accept letters of recommendation for family members. Also, just I think students can know and if they have an indication of whether like teachers kind of have a lot on their plate, or if a teacher is kind of open and honest with them by saying like, hey, this is maybe something I can't do by the deadline that you're giving me. Having students kind of also know like who to trust, especially teachers in this situation, is really important. And so like understanding not to have, if they have a teacher who's not maybe the most enthusiastic to write their letter, it's probably a blessing in disguise to avoid that teacher and writing their letter and finding someone who knows who will. And then lastly, for our next section, we're going to talk about creating a testing plan. And this is something that a lot of students that you'll have should already be kind of on the process for. The biggest question that you might get before senior year or junior year is really which test should they be taking, the ACT or the SAT. As of now in this process, as you're working with students, they should have taken at least one. And so if your student has already taken the SAT, they should be taking the SAT again. Or if they've already taken the ACT, they should be sticking to the ACT. What you're thinking about in this situation is that as students have taken the test before, getting comfortable and understanding that their test is a really key, important piece. And so having students kind of switch back and forth between both tests can really prove to be detrimental as you're looking to this process. However, if you do have a student who can really explain why they're switching tests, this could, really change your thinking as opposed to like if a student had only known the SAT but is really scientifically focused and has a good enough reasoning to like then take the ACT and has done the work and can show you that they have done everything they need to prepare for it and have done that honest reflection themselves, that's a great way to kind of understand and suss out, okay, the student is ready to take the ACT, and in reverse. So if a student was kind of just pressured into taking the ACT over the SAT and can really speak to that, that is a good idea and a good way to really suss out who, when there's that mixed matching. But if, for the most part, if the student's already taken one test or the other, they should really stick to that. Same thing for fee waivers. Each student should have a total of 4 fee waivers if they qualify for a fee waiver, and this is also subject to a school counselor. And so they will be able to allot their fee waiver. And so if they've already received their fee waiver, know that they're probably in good standing for another SAT, and then additionally to taking 2 SAT subject tests. However, if a student hasn't gotten a fee waiver yet and thinks that they could apply or qualify for one, know that you should be having this conversation with your students, and they should be able to give you a solid answer with I do qualify for a fee waiver or I don't qualify for a fee waiver. And if they don't know that they have to kind of aren't really able to, they really can't just sit back and just incur the fee and just think that their counselor will come to them, but really being proactive in this process of students going out and getting a fee waiver. In addition to retaking tests, we recommend that all students retake the test at least twice. If you have a situation where your student has gotten a 1500, that's fantastic. But something that we're also thinking about is making sure that students put themselves in the best position, especially in a testing facing direction here. And that kind of goes into the next point about super scoring and how by taking the test multiple times, a school will then super score your tests so that they'll take the best section from each, or they'll take the best score from each section in addition to a complete score. So in reality, being able to retake the test is kind of just a benefit, and especially if a student was to reverse in the sense of getting a better score on one section and getting a worse score on another, so that they can get the opportunity to get their test super scored so that they are put in the best spot. A couple other things to talk about here too are test optional versus test flexible schools. When we're talking about the differences between both types of tests, know that for a test optional school, this kind of leaves the decision up to the student as to whether or not they want to send their SAT scores to a school, and whether that's in their best interest to do so. And so if you feel like if your student's test scores matches the range or is above the range of a score that they're applying to, that's probably a great idea to still send in their scores. Or if it's below, it might be best to not then send in their test scores if it's optional. Test flexible is a little bit different, where a test flexible school will still require you to send in some version of a test score, but they might allow for different options in place of the SAT or ACT. So for example, some schools may waive the test requirements if you have a minimum GPA or are applying to a specific program, or for others, they could be an AP score instead of SAT score. So this really is done on the research of your students and making sure that they know when they are looking at a test flexible school, what does that mean in the sense of what else are they looking at when a school is test flexible. But in totality, when you're looking at test optional versus test flexible, know that this is all important to when you're establishing a balanced college list, and that the test score doesn't end up being the only component for when students are applying to college, and isn't the only component of when someone is gaining admission or not. Know that there are many situations where students with low test scores get into very high, heavy reach schools, and students with great test scores do not get into those reach schools. And so being able to understand how testing works and understand in that situation, and kind of making sure that you're still applying to a balanced college list, because this is all just a tool that colleges are using to then assess your student. So know that this isn't the be all end all. And then lastly, wanted to talk a little bit about the SAT subject test. This is another multiple choice test that assesses knowledge in a particular subject, so English, history, foreign language, math, or science. And the first question that a lot of advisors can ask is should my HSF take a SAT subject test? And in reality, if you are following our guidelines of when establishing a list of balanced schools, the answer is usually yes here, and that's because a lot of selective schools will require at least two subject tests. And again, it's putting your student in the best position throughout this process, and so that they have all the resources needed to really be successful throughout this. So just wanted to list a couple of examples that you might see here. So if your student's a STEM major, it's really important that they're taking subject tests that reflect that. especially for when schools are impacted based off major. So being able to show excellency in like the math or science is key. So having them sign up for a combination of mathematics 2 or chemistry. If you have a student who's non-STEM or undecided, it could be great to just have a good balance here. So of one STEM related class and one humanities, and that could end up looking like biology and US history for subject tests. But then there are also really, and then this is again to kind of establish different schools have different requirements, and like if you're applying to a school, specifically Georgetown, they recommend that you take 3 subject tests. And that's definitely outside the norm, but if your student is really set on applying to Georgetown, then know that they're going to be probably taking three subject tests. And that could be a combination of world history, Spanish, or mathematics. And so being able to really suss out and be able to advise to each student on what each one is, and kind of establishing their testing plan is super key and really important. And know that one size doesn't fit all, and that you have to kind of fit into to match your students' advising and match what their path is, and really establish many different touch points to understand what their testing plan looks like. And then lastly, here are some dates. As you can look at the ACT and SAT test dates, know that the subject test dates also coincide with the SAT test dates. So if you if your students are signing up for 2 subject tests in the fall, know that signing up for the October 5th and the November 2nd dates are important here, as you do want to get the subject test in sooner rather than later.
Great. So let's wrap this session up by talking a little bit about what we learned from this year's enrollment. Many of the lessons that we learned will apply later in the fall semester and in the winter, but we want you to start thinking about them now so you can have them in mind as you work with your students on their college lists. First, how did our students do? They did extremely well. Of the active high school fellows, meaning those who worked with an advising fellow, 81% committed to a high graduation rate school. The increase in active HSFs versus all HSFs who committed to a high grad rate school is another piece of evidence in favor of the impact of advising. We see that there's not much difference between the 2 groups in terms of committing to a Barron's Tier 1 through 4 school, and the Barron's list somewhat overlaps with the high graduation rate list. As a reminder, the high graduation rate list is our best proxy for academic fit. However, our most interesting finding was in students who committed to a New York Times College Access Index school. This College Access Index is something we use as a proxy for financial fit, and that students committing to these schools often are assured of a strong financial aid package. This year, we saw numbers in both categories fall, which suggests that financial fit was an issue in college lists for the class of 2019. That in building their college lists, students weren't actively considering a wide range of schools that would give them great financial options. So let's talk about how we address that. What did we learn? First of all, college lists do not equal college applications. So on December 31st, all of your students will have hopefully submitted their full range of college applications. What we've actually found is that students will commonly not submit some of the schools that you may have discussed about and even prepared applications for. This happens for a variety of reasons. Sometimes students just plain old burn out. Sometimes they get an early acceptance that means they don't end up applying to some of their target or safety schools. Winter break can feel like a lull, and you are all often on break having finished finals and may not be as available to your students. It is incredibly important that you follow through and know where your students applied. We have a number of unfortunate cases this year where students made last-minute decisions about their applications without consulting their advisors and then found themselves in a tough spot in relation to their final options. Secondly, balance that list. This means targets, reaches, and safeties. All too often we'll hear, my student can't find any targets or safeties that they're interested in. This to me suggests that a student is only interested in schools they've heard of or well-known schools, which is a dangerous path. There are over 300 schools on the high graduation rate list at all levels of academic selectivity. So for a student to say that they can't find any schools that they would be interested in that fit those target and safety categories tells me that they haven't looked hard enough. Finally, a list that includes every Ivy League school is a terrible college list. That tells us that that student has given no thought to their personal fit. The campuses of the Ivies or the most selective schools are very, very different from each other. And a student who's happy at Columbia may not be as happy at Cornell. They're very different places. So if a student is applying to every single Ivy, it tells me that name brand or selectivity is the most important factor for that student, which doesn't ultimately potentially translate to a happy college experience. So we are going to emphasize time and time again that you use deep college research to explore new target and safety options in particular so that your students list is well-rounded. One of the new things we'll be rolling out this summer and fall are college snapshots in your look-aheads and via our Facebook page so that you can get familiar with a wider range of schools. We don't expect our advising fellows to know every detail about all 300 schools on the high grad rate list, so we want to highlight some that you may not have heard of, but that might be a great fit for your student. Our final learning in this area will be conservative when thinking about whether a school is a target, reach, or safety. The guidance for Matriculate that you all know well from your ACEs and your earlier training is to look at the range of SAT scores and see where your student fits in relation to that. We also advise that any school with a less than 10% acceptance rate is automatically a reach. Beyond that, though, it's more art than science, and in order to ensure that your student has great options, we'd urge you to be conservative. I saw a college list last year where the students' 2 target schools listed were Brown and Johns Hopkins. Friends, those are not target schools. So be conservative, err on the side of caution, and make sure your student is going to have options where they're going to feel happy and that they have a good match and fit no matter where they end up. Affordability trumps academic fit in the final decision. Where we had students this year who did not enroll in high graduation rate schools, the single biggest reason was that the low graduation rate option offered much better financial aid. So at this time of year, we want you to do 2 things. First, look at the list of schools that meet 100% need. This is available in the curriculum base and can give you a sense of options you may not have considered, but that offer strong financial aid. Second, in mid-October, you'll start filling out the FAFSA and supporting your student there. When your student receives their estimated family contribution, talk about that number. A number of moderate income students will have an expected family contribution, and that number can often induce sticker shock. A number of students get the misconception that they're going to be paying 0 for school, especially if they're admitted to some of the more selective schools, and that's just not the case for a lot of students. So when they get that number back, that's a great time to use estimated cost calculators to start applying to outside scholarships and to make sure your student is talking to their family about what that number means and what affordability may look like so that they can re-examine their college list if necessary. And finally, even though it's June, we're going to say now that winter break advising matters. It is really easy to wrap up finals and head home and take a well-deserved break after a busy fall semester. However, keep in mind that regular decision applications are due at the end of December. So while you may be Netflix binging and, relaxing after a long semester, your students are still hard at work and they need to hear from you to know that they're staying on track. So winter break is a great time to check in and confirm that they're applying where you decided together that they would apply, to review any financial aid packages that come in from early acceptances, to talk about decisions that come in from rolling admission schools, and to apply to more schools if needed. If they get some early rejections, that might mean that students want to recalibrate that college list for a final time to make sure that they're going to have final options in March and April. So winter break is a time to really make sure you're staying in touch with your students, even if you think that the work is done. So next steps. The biggest next step for this summer is that college list review is coming. This is a moment where we'll ask high school fellows to submit their draft lists, not their final lists, to Matriculate for professional feedback. We have a team of college counseling volunteers who review every list and send personalized feedback to both the high school fellows and to you, their advising fellows, with the expectation that you two can discuss the feedback and use it to inform the final college list. This is a great tool to guide your conversations and to get an outside neutral perspective. The college list reviewers don't have every personal detail about your student, but they will have a student profile that'll allow them to tailor their recommendations. We urge high school fellows to submit early before the list is finalized so that the feedback has a greater chance of being useful to them. College list submissions will open on June 18th. The link to submit college lists will be sent directly to your high school fellows via their survey and their monthly look ahead. And we're looking to receive all draft lists by August 15th. That way, your students can redo their college lists if necessary or add and remove schools based on recommendations and have the entire fall to work on all of the application elements we've reviewed today. College list review is the most exciting time in that it starts to preview for us what options students may have in the spring, and we look forward to supporting you during college list review. That brings our summer curriculum module to a close. Thanks for listening, and as always, with any questions, reach out to your head advising fellows and to your campus leads. We're happy to support you. Thanks so much, and have a great summer.